Hey there, film fans! Welcome back to my channel. If you love movies and series as much as I do, hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. Enjoy the video. The film starts with the life of a disabled man named Jake. Jake was a soldier in a naval battalion, but he was shot in the throat and became unable to move. But he tries to prove to himself that he can do anything. He went to a nightclub and saw someone hitting a girl, and Jake attacked him and beat him. But then he threw him out. Then he discovered that two people were looking for him to tell him that his twin brother, Tommy, died. He was a successful investor, and he was studying for 3 years to help in the project, which we will explain later. They told him that they wanted him to replace his brother because they have almost the same genes, and he is the one who will solve his brother's problem. Then they burned his body in front of him, and it was a very satisfactory deal for him. A new beginning, but he will be free, not tied to a chair. After about 6 years of cold sleep at a temperature less than 0, Jake wakes up and finds out that the ship is heading for a place called Pandora, which is a blue planet similar to the content of the planet Earth, because there are many forests. And when they arrived at Pandora through a space shuttle, Jake was one of a group of civilian employees and military soldiers, and they were 4 and 10 light years away from Earth. They asked them to wear masks because the atmosphere of the planet does not support human life, and if you get exposed to this atmosphere for 20 seconds, you will lose consciousness. And you will die if you stay for 4 minutes. We find the whole group going down to the base, which is called the Gate of Hell, which is surrounded by a huge wall, and behind them is Jake on the moving chair, and a number of soldiers are waiting for him. Then we see different pictures of the bases, buildings, and machining machines that dig the soil of the planet Pandora. All the time, Jake was thinking about what his role would be in the shadow of the system that relies on power and effort, and he has no power around him. Then Jake enters a military meeting, and the Dean Miles Zakwarich is the one who addresses and tells them some information about the original inhabitants of Pandora. Like anything, they will try to kill you. He says that although his mission is to save his people from extinction, he will not be able to save all the people there, and if they want to stay alive, they must follow the rules of Pandora. Jake meets 2 scientists at the factory, Norm Spellman and Dr. Max Patel, who are participants in the Avatar program. He explores the place and finds in front of him the symbolic image of his brother's avatar, which is now his avatar. Then he meets Dr. Grace, who specializes in genetic science in the program. She was very upset when she saw Jake, because she wanted her brother, the doctor, who spent 3 years with her in the Pandora project, to understand all the details. Grace went to Parker, the leader of the base, who's the project manager and supervisor of all the soldiers and civilians in the colony, and told him that the last thing he needed was another problem like Jake, because she needs a researcher, not a disabled person. Parker replied calmly, saying that luck was on their side to find someone like Jake, because he is genetically identical to his brother Tommy. But he was a soldier in the Navy, so he could benefit from his military skills and help them achieve the general goal of the project, which is to obtain an inhabitanium metal, which is a source of energy, 1 kilo of which is worth 20 million, and through it, we can deliver cheap energy to the ground. Parker told Grace that one of the goals of the project is to form a relationship with the Na'vi people, which is located on Pandora, so that it will help them reach the inhabitanium metal as soon as possible. But Grace replied to him and told him that this would not happen again. After a number of Na'vi people were killed by the army in a process called silverage, and the next day, Jake and Norm were tied to their avatar, and Jake woke up and found himself in the avatar's body. After a few moments, Jake made everyone in the lab nervous and asked him to calm down. But they could not control him because he was huge, because the length of the avatar is from 10 to 12 feet, and much stronger than a human. But he was happy because it was the first time he had moved his body since he was shot with a bullet. And he ran away from the lab and kept running until he met the avatar of Grace, who controlled him and brought him back. And as soon as he woke up from sleep, he cut off the connection between Jake and the avatar and returned to his original life again, and met Jake Trudy Chacon, a flying aircraft from the naval station, and he will stay with her for a few weeks to get used to his avatar's image, and he will explore the planet and meet Jake with the Creed Quaritch, and told him that he was amazed at his service record and all that he accomplished in all his tours in the army, and one of them was in Venezuela. But the Creed also warned him of the dangers that could face him on the planet Pandora, and told him how he wears a huge AMP, which is a large brace, and told him that he would take care of the surgery that Jake would need if he could collect information about the original inhabitants of Pandora, and if he could convince them to leave the place where his anus and botanicals are, so that he would not have to kill them by force. And when they connected Jake to the avatar again, Jake was with Grace and Norm in the Trudy aircraft. And as soon as the team landed, Grace and Norm were taking samples from the plants, and Jake was guarding them, and he went to walk in a flower field called Helioradian, which is a huge tree of its own, and it grows small as soon as Jake touches it. And suddenly, a problem appears, and he faces an animal called Neytiri, which is a creature with a heavy arm and a spear in its head. And Grace tells him not to shoot it, and that all the animals it does are just a show. And suddenly, Neytiri ran away from Jake. But that was because there was a monster behind Jake, and Grace told him to run away quickly. And the argument between the monster and Jake remained in the forest until they reached the waterfall, and Jake jumped until he reached the land of safety away from the monster. But he was far from the team that was looking for him, so Trudy said that they had to go back to the base, because the night flights and operations were not allowed, and they were all desperate, especially Grace, who said that she would not last until the morning. And there was one of the Na'vi people pointing the spear towards Jake. But she eventually retreated and decided not to shoot him, and when small creatures landed on the spear, and what we learned later that they were very pure spirits called Iva seeds. And Eva is a powerful divine god with the Na'vi, and when the night came, Jake was chased by a group of animals, and he was pointing his spear to get away from the animals that looked like wolves. And Jake's animals attacked him, and he defended himself, but they were chasing him. So the Na'vi, who we know is called Neytiri, defended him, and killed one of them, and she was sad, and told Jake that he was the reason for all this, and that he should not be here. And he had to go back to where he came from. And in the end, she told her, "Why you scared me?" And she told him that he had a strong heart, and he was not afraid, but he was stupid. And Jake stayed with Neytiri, and he was asking for her help all the way. And he told her that he wanted to learn, and she told him no, and asked him to come back immediately. And then Ava seeds appear again, and all of them land on Jake. And Neytiri was surprised, and changed her mind that he would come with her. And they were walking suddenly. A patrol of Na'vi warriors fell on them, and the leader of the patrol was Sutai, who expected to marry Neytiri. And Neytiri prevented them from hurting Jake, and told them that there was a sign from Iva. And Sutai orders the soldiers to bring the leader of the tribe, named Itukin. And then Jake is presented to his father and mother, who were at the same time the king and queen of the tribe. And Jake says that he was a warrior, and he wanted to learn from them, and he agreed to sit and learn everything. And at the same time, they will understand more about the dreamers, or the space humans, and especially that it was the first time they met a human soldier. And they assigned the responsibility of teaching him to Neytiri, who did not agree with this decision at first. And in the end, he distributed the dinner to them and went to sleep. And at that time, Jake wakes up in his real world, and all the scientists met in the morning with Jake, and they were hearing all the details that he had reached. And at the same time, Norma felt a sense of hope and jealousy towards Jake. And all the scientists and soldiers in the project were convinced that the only solution was that Jake convinced the Na'vi to move from their place, and that this was the best way to convince them. And they informed him that he had 3 months before the soldiers arrived. And Jake starts learning with Neytiri, and he teaches him how to ride a horse, and how to tie his nerves with it, which is called sahilo, and that he must feel it first, and with the beating of his heart and breathing. And when the horse moved, Jake fell, and he counts the horses, and says to him what they gave him. And Jake returns to the contract in Silveridge, and he gives them information about the house of Omaticaya, the giant, which has large pillars, and he also gives them information about the tree structure, which is about 1,000 feet high. And Quaritch saw that he had to destroy the tree, but Jake asked him to negotiate with the Na'vi, and convinced them to leave the place. And Max saw all this, and felt that Quaritch and Silveridge were playing with Jake, so she told Grace, and she decided to move the whole process from Dodge, and move them to the mountains of Haloya. And it is a remote area full of desolate islands, and sacred to the Na'vi, and to stay away from the military authority. And in the scenes that Jake shows, and he records videos and talks about the experience, and everything he feels, and says that the time he spends with the Na'vi and learning their language is like reenacting field weapons. Repetition is the same as repetition until you learn. And these scenes are cut with training scenes and daily monitoring. And I understand the relationship of the Na'vi with Forrest, that all the energy that is exhausted will come back, and he must return again. And with time, Jake became fit into hunting, and knew the prayers that they say after each hunt. And she told him that his hunting is clean, and he is ready for the rituals. And she told him that his hunting is clean, and he is ready for the rituals, which is the Declan ride. And Jake went with Sue and Neytiri, and 2 others to the high mountains, which is where the Declan is, and she chose Jake to go first. And Neytiri tells him that you have 1 chance, and whoever you choose, he must also choose you. And he stays with you forever, and does not allow anyone else to ride him. And Jake tries once to ride the Declan, but he falls, and Sue laughs. But Jake tries again and succeeds, and he flies with his Declan and is behind Neytiri, and they fly together, and reach the sacred tree, known as the Tree of Souls. And Neytiri taught him how to fly easily, and once they were flying, a creature known as Turok attacked them, and he kept chasing them until they could escape from him. And Neytiri said that his name means the last shadow, because he is usually the last shadow you see, because after that he kills you. And when he came back, she explained a lot to Jake about Turok, and let him see the statue of the great Turok ancestors, and told him that the last person to ride the Turok was his great-grandfather, and used this animal to unify the 5 tribes, which are now divided. And when Jake returned to his human form, it was clear that he had changed through his last experience, and we understood this when he said that the Na'vi are the real world, and the life of humans is the dream. And after that, the doctrine appears, and tells him that his mission is over, and that he must return to Earth. And to implement his word with him, he arranged for him to take his treatment, and to return to walk again. But Jake wanted to delay his departure, because he was already one of the tribe, and he will have the right to negotiate. And he agrees with the doctrine. And Jake really attends the Na'vi party, and they believe that each person is born twice, once at his birth, and the second time when he becomes an individual of the tribe. And she took him, and went to the holy place near the tree, and told him that now he can make a stick from the tree, and also choose a wife. But Jake told her that she really chose her, and she just needs to choose him, and she agrees. But Jake wakes up in the lab, and she wakes up in the forest, and the trees around her fall from everywhere, and there are trees in every place, and she pulled Jake's avatar in a far place. And when Jake comes back to his avatar, he knows the problem around them, and he tries to stop them, and he gets angry, and he broke the cameras of the drones, and the soldiers shot him until the Na'vi warriors arrived. And at the same time, the doctrine is introduced to Jake, who is in the form of an avatar, and in a discussion, the Na'vi decide to fight. But Grace and Jake argue with them, and the discussion is interrupted, and he tries to shout, "Kill Jake!" because he is married to a military man, and he is a coward in front of a Yawa. And then Jake announces that he is a Na'vi, and he has the right to speak. And suddenly, the avatar of Grace and Jake fell, because the doctrine cut off the connection between them, and they returned to their human forms again. And Grace reveals to the doctrine that the tangerine trees make a network of neural connections, more than what is in the human brain, and that the Na'vi benefits from this network, and that the Umatikaya tribe will not leave the Humetri at all. And Parker and the doctrine discuss, and they decide to attack the Humetri, and they shoot gas bombs to drive the Na'vi away. But Jake tries to persuade them to allow him to return to the Umatikaya tribe again, to convince them to leave, and Parker agrees, and tells them that they have only 1 hour, and then the attack will begin. But unfortunately, Grace and Jake are not welcomed back, and Jake tells them that the space people want them to leave their place. Otherwise, they will feel that the attack is violent on the place. And Neytiri asked him if he knew this from the beginning, and he replied to her, and told her that the space people sent him to be one of you, and he told you that you must leave here. But Neytiri was upset with him, and lost trust in him, and they decided to restrict Grace and Jake. And at the same time, they found a fleet of planes and spaceships, and they began to shoot gas bombs. And then they opened fire on them, and on the tree. And as the battle increased, the goal of the operation was to target the tree, which is their home. So the doctrine ordered the launch of explosives on the tree, and he killed many Na'vi because of it. And Neytiri's mother took the knife and freed Jake and Grace, and asked them to help them. But Jake arrived late, and found Neytiri with her father, who was shot by a bullet from the tree. And his last wish was that Neytiri, his daughter, take his kiss, and protect the people, and try to help Jake. But she refused him again, and there was a great destruction in the forest. It was like a disaster. It was clear that this destruction was still in the gang. And suddenly, Grace and Jake returned to their human bodies, and were put in detention on charges of treason. And Norm was arrested with them, to prevent the soldiers from separating the avatar shape of Grace and Jake. And Trudy arrived at the detention place, and the guard deceived her, and called Max to write the password of the doors, and help them escape. But the doctrine discovered the escape and fired at them, and Grace was shot. And Trudy went to the mountains to move the lab to a place in the forest, and Jake returned to the avatar body again. But Jake will certainly face difficulties in joining the group of Kaya again, because he was defeated. So he had to make a bold decision to regain the trust of the Na'vi again. So he rode his own Declan, and he was looking for Turok, and the only solution to control him was to attack him from above, and thus he could control him in this way. And Jake jumped on Turok, and went to the tribe of Omatikaya, near the sacred tree, and everyone was amazed at what Neytiri was in. And Neytiri apologized to him for her refusal, and Sutai, who is now the leader of the tribe, told Jake that he now represents the legendary role of Turok for the Na'vi people, and he now respects him, and asked Jake from Muad to help Grace, who was dying, and put Grace's body and avatar in the sacred tree. And the goal was to transfer Grace's consciousness from her body to the avatar's body permanently. But for this to happen, it was necessary to pass over the Eye of Aya, and that the Great Mother Aya is the one who can allow this, or choose to keep Grace with her forever, and the rituals began. But they did not succeed. And before Grace died, Grace told Jake that Aya is real, and Jake stopped and began to speak in the name of Turok, who had died, and told them that this is the time to send messages to the people of heaven, and tell them that this is our land. But in order to do this, we must gather all the Na'vi tribes, and that they fight with us, and unite all the peoples, and that Sutai is the leader of the Omatikaya tribe, and will help in the gathering of all the other tribes. And at the same time, the army met pictures of the Na'vi's pressure in the region, and that they will reach 20,000, and that they must launch a violent attack, and that the goal this time is the sacred tree, because they believed that if the tree was destroyed, the Na'vi would flee again. And Maxi, Norma, and Jake reported all the information, and that the attack would be tomorrow at 6 a.m. And Jake was busy with the Na'vi's gathering, and then he went to the Tree of Souls, and asked Aya to help them, and that the human race killed their Mother Earth. But Neytiri appears, and tells him that Aya does not feel sorry for anyone, and that she is maintaining the balance of life. And at 6 a.m., the Na'vi's army gathered, and the bombardment began, and he was heading towards the Tree of Aya, and at a certain moment, the attack began on the Na'vi from the sky and the earth, and at first, there were losses on both sides, and Jake relied on his attack to cut off the ships from above, using the special deckland for each one, and with time, he ordered the ship's deck to follow him, and the fire was directed at him, and suddenly, the Taroti appeared, and the fire opened on the deck and his ship, and with the passage of time, Vatar Norm was injured, and his human form returned, and the special deckland was hit by Neytiri, and the Taroti was killed after the ship's deck exploded, and the human army was in the upper hand, and the matter was just a matter of moments. And Neytiri knew that, and Jake tried to contact Sutai, but he failed, and tried to reach Taroti, but she was dead. And the ship gives the order to prepare the cannons to drop the sacred tree, and Neytiri tells Jake that a large number of the Na'vi died, and the humans are now advancing, but Jake told her that she should withdraw, and that's an order. But Neytiri took the decision and held her neck. But suddenly, she answered yes to Jake's prayer for help, and a group of animals appeared like dinosaurs and clashed with the human army. And this moment was a matter of transformation in the war. And once again, Neytiri started to participate in the war with many of the creatures of the Pandora, and a huge animal appears to her and bends to her so that she can ride it and continue in the war. And Jake climbs his tree and jumps on one of the ships that were ready to drop the cannons, and put the cannons manually at the engine, and the ship exploded away from the sacred tree. And he goes back to the road and jumps on the boat of Neytiri to put another bomb in the engine. But suddenly, Neytiri made a curved flight, and Jake fell, but he holds it at the last moment. And he went to throw the last column in the engine, and the ship exploded completely. But the column managed to escape in the form of a huge AMP at the last moment. And he landed on the ground and reached the camp where Jake was in his human body, and took steps towards the camp. But Neytiri attacked him with her animal, and the column was able to kill the animal, and it was still going to kill Neytiri. Jake appeared and told him that the game was over, and the war was over. But the column responded to him and told him, "What is your feeling now? And you are a traitor to your people." And Jake was able to destroy the substitute. And the column appeared, and he was wearing a mask. And he told Jake that he was one of them. And now it was time to wake up, and he went to hit the camp. And at that moment, Neytiri was about to free herself, and Jake grabbed the substitute's shield again, and made the column turn on. So he grabbed the column from his hair, and pulled out the knife, and suddenly he found an arrow from Neytiri in his chest, and to make sure he was killed, he hit him with another one. But Jake had fallen his avatar, and he was in his human form, but he was unable to breathe. And Neytiri quickly understood, and arrived at the right time, and helped him wear the mask. And she told him that she saw him, and saw him in his human form for the first time, and she was happy. And they kept looking for the injured until they found Sutai very injured and would not be able to escape. And Sutai asked Jake to take over the leadership of the tribe in his place, and Jake refused at first, but they told him that the decision was made, and he grabbed his hand and pulled out a knife, and he told him to kill me, because this is the right way to be the leader, and that Sutai will be immortalized in memory, and that he is proud to fight with Turok Makato, and that they were brothers, and that Jake was his last shadow, and Jake killed him, and all the people who were in the base of the earth through space. Makuk returned, and a small number of them were allowed to stay, like Norm and Dr. Battlemax. And Jake documented the last video clip of him, and chose to be transferred to the avatar of him forever. And Jake passes through the Eye of Iwa, and wakes up for the last time with Neytiri. And here the film ends, which tells us that life gives us many opportunities, but we must take advantage of one of them at least. And thus the summary is complete, and we meet in the second part. And thank you for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to follow the Page Summary Movie Official at Facebook. And see you in the next summary. Bye.